Ethiopia, a country with a rich history marked by both unity and diversity, has encountered numerous internal conflicts over the past few decades. One of the most pressing challenges today is the ongoing conflict in the Amhara region, which has deeply affected both the area and the nation at large.
Heavy fighting has flared up again in several parts of the Ethiopian region of Amhara, where government troops are battling a local militia. Artillery was used in the latest clashes.
A major player in this conflict is the Fano militia. Initially formed as a loosely organized group of armed volunteers, Fano has evolved into a formidable force in Amhara. Fano's popularity among Amhara nationalists soared as they were viewed as defenders of the region's rights and territorial claims. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the origins of Fano, a militia group deeply rooted in Ethiopia's Amhara region, and also examine the complex factors that have led to the current conflict in the area. Fano is a fragmented group of loosely organized militias that claims to be defending the rights of the Amhara, Ethiopia's second largest ethnic group. They enjoy broad popular support within the Amhara community. The Fano militias advocate for the restoration of Amhara control over their traditional homelands, including areas in the western and southern Tigra zones. The term Fano has deep historical roots dating back centuries. In Amharic, it refers to someone who travels on their own accord or a band of leaderless soldiers who are not accountable to anyone. In pre-20th century Ethiopia, Fano played a crucial role as a source of armed labor for regional rulers who would mobilize them to fight during times of need. In the 20th century, under the more centralized rule of Emperor Haile Selassie I, Fano were also called upon to resist the Italian invasion and occupation of Ethiopia from 1936 to 1941. Later, during the rise of the Marxist-Leninist Ethiopian student movement, the term Fano was adopted to describe its members in their struggle against both the Haile Selassie regime and the Derg regime that followed. The rise of the present-day Fano militia in Amhara needs to be looked at in the context of Ethiopia's ethnic federalism, which is deeply embedded in the country's constitution. Historically, the Amhara people have held significant influence in Ethiopian politics, particularly during the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie, which lasted until his overthrow in 1974. Following his fall, Ethiopia came under the control of a Marxist regime known as the Derg, which ruled the country through authoritarian means. The Derg's rule came to an end in 1991 when it was overthrown by the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, with support from Eritrean rebels. In May 1991, the TPLF led the establishment of the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, the EPRDF, a coalition that introduced a new political framework based on ethnic federalism. Ethiopia officially adopted a federal system in 1995, primarily to manage its diverse population, which includes over 80 ethno-linguistic groups. Under this system, the country was reorganized into ethno-regions, with some regions being quite large, such as Amhara and Oromia, while others are smaller, reflecting the size and distribution of the dominant ethnic groups in those areas. The Tigray region was also redrawn as part of this federal restructuring. Supporters of this system argued that it was created to maintain Ethiopia's unity by granting autonomy to its various ethnic groups. They see it as a necessary, though imperfect, attempt to address the historical legacies of violent state formation, forced assimilation, and unequal relations between ethnicities. On the other hand, critics contend that this focus on group rights has come at the cost of Ethiopia's national unity. They argue that instead of fostering cohesion, this system has caused ethnic groups that have long coexisted to drift apart. This growing separation, they claimed, has contributed to increasing ethnic tensions and violence in Ethiopia. Amhara elites, who had been key figures in the imperial era, were particularly vocal in their opposition. Under the imperial system, they had played a significant role in establishing Amharic as Ethiopia's national language and promoting Orthodox Christianity as the state religion. Many Amhara felt that the TPLF unfairly portrayed them as oppressive rulers who had dominated other ethnic groups during the reign of the emperors. Additionally, many Amhara accused the TPLF of redrawing Ethiopia's internal boundaries to annex Amhara land, particularly in disputed areas like Wokait and Raya. The Amhara believed these changes were aimed at diminishing their influence, including the controversial installation of a Tigrayan patriarch in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. They also argued that the TPLF, despite promoting ethnic federalism, retained significant centralized control, particularly over the security apparatus, its coalition partners, and key sectors of the economy. The current Fano militias began to take shape during the mass protests in Ethiopia from 2016 to 2018, which were directed against the TPLF-led Ethiopian government. At that time, Fano resembled a loosely organized youth movement. Alongside the Oromo Quero protest movement, Fano played a key role in challenging the ruling EPRDF. Their efforts were instrumental in bringing Abiy Ahmed and his Prosperity Party to power in 2018, effectively ending TPLF dominance and placing an Oromo native in leadership. Many Fano leaders were imprisoned during the protest but were later released after Abiy Ahmed became Prime Minister in April 2018, signaling a shift in political power and approach. Seizing the opportunity for change, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed criticized the systemic repression by the state and promised to democratize Ethiopia. His vision of a more unified, inclusive Ethiopia resonated with many Amhara who rallied behind his pan-Ethiopian rhetoric. The Fano and Amhara saw Abiy Ahmed as an ally in their long-standing political and territorial disputes with Tigray's leadership, and they supported him in his opposition to the TPLF. Unfortunately, despite Abiy Ahmed's rise to power, narratives portraying the Amhara as historical oppressors, propagated by ethno-nationalist forces such as the TPLF and the Oromo Liberation Front, continued and even intensified. These groups framed the Amhara as seeking to dominate other ethnicities, deepening divisions and contributing to ongoing tensions in Ethiopia. Over time, many Amhara began to grow suspicious of Prime Minister Ahmed's leadership. The first major cause for concern came in 2019 before the war in Tigray. In June of that year, gunmen assassinated Amhara region president Ambachu Mekonnen and other officials in Bayelda, the regional capital. Shortly after, federal forces killed Amhara's security chief Asaminio Tsege, accusing him of orchestrating the assassinations as part of a regional coup attempt. However, some of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's opponents within the Amhara community alleged that he had orchestrated the entire incident to curb the growing assertiveness of the Amhara region, which had been bolstered by Asaminio's actions. In the years that followed, many within Amhara and the Fano movement felt that their interests and demands were being sidelined by the new political dispensation. This is why increasing signs of Fano militancy emerged, especially around causes important to Amhara nationalist interests as the group became more involved in armed conflicts. Despite these growing tensions, they were largely overshadowed by the anti-TPLF alliance that federal and Amhara leaders forged when the war in Tigray broke out in November 2020. This alliance temporarily united them against a common enemy, even as internal disagreements simmered beneath the surface. The war between the Ethiopian federal government and the TPLF in November 2020 saw Fano militias actively siding with the government alongside the Amhara Special Forces, a paramilitary group linked to the regional government. For many in the Amhara region, the conflict was viewed as an opportunity to reclaim disputed territories, especially the Wokait and Raya areas which had been incorporated into Tigray during the EPRDF era. The Tigra War allowed Fano to establish camps, recruit and train fighters, and benefit from the government's logistical, security, and administrative networks. This significantly expanded the Fano militia's influence and strengthened their military capacity. During the conflict, Fano militias moved to take control of western Tigray, an area long claimed by Amhara. However, as part of this offensive, Fano has been accused by organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch of engaging in ethnic cleansing in western Tigray, where hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans were forcibly expelled. In some cases, Amhara settlers were reportedly moved into the area afterward. Also, during the war with the TPLF, Fano militiamen carried out attacks in Oromia, asserting that they were protecting ethnic Amharas from the Oromo Liberation Army, the OLA, which had been involved in ongoing insurgencies in the region. However, Fano has faced accusations of carrying out ethnically motivated violence against Oromos during these operations, further fueling ethnic tensions between the two groups. At the same time, many Amharas felt deeply betrayed by the federal government's failure to prevent the TPLF from advancing into their region in June 2021. Amhara nationalists accused the Ethiopian National Defense Forces of abandoning key towns and cities in the Amhara region, retreating instead of defending strategic positions important to the local population. Further fueling mistrust, accusations emerged that some Oromo generals in the Ethiopian National Defense Forces had retreated without engaging in combat, leaving behind heavy weaponry that the TPLF later seized. In turn, this deepened the rift between Amhara forces and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's administration, as well as the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. To make matters worse, in April 2022, during a truce with the TPLF, the government launched a major crackdown on the Fano militia, viewing them as a growing threat to its authority. Thousands of Fano militiamen were arrested, while others went into hiding. This led to clashes with Fano fighters, further escalating tensions between the group and the federal government. Another major grievance among the Amhara and Fano regarding the conflict in northern Ethiopia arose from their exclusion from the peace agreement signed in Pretoria in November 2022 to end the war in Tigray. The agreement was met with deep suspicion and dissatisfaction among Amharas. They were excluded from the negotiations despite the significant role played by Fano militias and the Amhara special forces during the conflict. Fano and many Amharas accused the government of engaging with the TPLF and the Oromo Liberation Army in peace talks that failed to address the wrongs inflicted on the Amhara people. They believed the deal left the ethnic Amhara vulnerable and without sufficient protection or justice for the harm they had suffered during the conflict. The end of the war with the TPLF also exposed rising tensions between the Amhara and the Oromo, Ethiopia's two largest ethnic groups, both of which are central to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's ruling coalition. The Amhara Association of America, which tracks violence against ethnic Amhara, reported that over 3,300 Amhara were killed in 2021, with most of these deaths occurring in Oromia. As if all of this was not already complex enough, there is still ongoing discontent regarding the political deadlock over the status of disputed territories in the southern and western Tigray regions, especially Walkayit and Raya. By 2022, the growing influence of Fano militias and their defense of Amhara interests began to alarm both the federal and regional governments, who viewed the operations outside of the official security framework as a potential threat. This is why in May 2022, the government began removing the opportunities and advantages afforded to Fano. Efforts were initiated to disband the group and reintegrate its members into civilian life. However, many within Fano strongly resisted these efforts, refusing to participate in the demobilization process. This resistance led to armed clashes between Fano fighters and government security forces. In April 2023, armed confrontations erupted after the federal government announced its decision to disband regional special forces across Ethiopia. Many in the Amhara region believed that this move was specifically aimed at weakening the Amhara special forces, interpreting it in light of unresolved territorial disputes between Amhara and Tigray, particularly over areas such as Walkayit and Raya.
Protesters in cities and towns across Ethiopia's Amhara region have rallied in support of their local forces for 5 days in a row. They want the federal government to abandon its plans to integrate their regional fighters into the national military or police. Violence near Amhara's border with Tigray forced some areas to impose curfews and restrict public transport.
The decision to dissolve regional special forces was seen by many in Amhara as leaving them vulnerable to potential aggression from other regions, particularly in the context of ongoing tensions with Tigray. This perception triggered widespread protests and armed clashes involving members of the Amhara Special Forces, Fano militias, and the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. After the official disbandment of the Amhara Special Forces, approximately 50% of its former members joined Fano militias. This is according to the Federal Ministry of Peace. This caused further unrest, though the violence subsided somewhat in May and June 2023 as ENDF forces regained control of the Amhara region and arrested numerous Fano fighters and their supporters. The situation in the Amhara region escalated in August 2023 as fierce clashes between Fano militias and the ENDF resulted in significant casualties. Although lacking a unified command structure, the Fano militias demonstrated their strength through a series of significant actions. For instance, Fano briefly took control of the airport in Lalibela, a historic city renowned for its rock-hewn churches, underscoring their ability to strike in key strategic locations. Fano militiamen also raided police stations, looting weapons and ammunition, further bolstering their military capacity. Around that same time, in a bold move, Fano stormed a prison in Bayelda, freeing thousands of inmates, including many of their own members, enhancing their manpower and reinforcing their ranks. In response, the federal government declared a state of emergency in an attempt to restore order. The state of emergency in Amhara handed the government powers to impose curfews, restrict people's movement, and ban public gatherings. However, according to Amnesty International, Ethiopian authorities have used the state of emergency in Amhara to silence peaceful dissent by arbitrarily detaining prominent politicians critical of the government, as well as journalists. In late September 2024, the Ethiopian government launched an offensive against Fano after they initiated a series of attacks across the Amhara region. The Fano briefly captured several towns, including Gonda and Metema, before the government responded with military action. The escalation came as Ethiopia's rainy season ended with drier conditions, allowing easier troop movement and improved effectiveness of military drones. On 1 October 2024, a federal military spokesperson stated that the offensive against Fano had been intensified after peace overtures were ignored, vowing that operations would continue until Fano was eliminated. Despite the scale of this particular offensive, very few people believe that it will succeed. This is because Fano enjoys widespread local support, understands the rural terrain intimately, and receives backing from the diaspora. At the same time, the militia is divided and weakened by internal conflicts. Various analysts estimate that there are at least a dozen major Fano groups, not counting subgroups, and that infighting has prevented them from forming a unified political or military command structure. With ongoing violence and no clear path to reconciliation, Ethiopia faces a prolonged period of unrest, and the future of Amhara remains uncertain as neither side seems capable of achieving a decisive resolution. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.